Ever since the ASUS ROG Ally was announced, it felt like there's finally some competition with the Steam Deck. I'm sure there were handheld PCs in this form factor, even predating the Steam Deck, but they were all closer to $1,000 than they were to $500. The Steam Deck comes in three varieties, the cheapest being $400 and the most expensive being $650. So when ASUS announced that the ROG Ally was going to be $700, only $50 more than the most expensive Steam Deck, it defined a category of handheld PCs in this price range, with the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally clearly in this price range and everything else off to the side. So I've had the ROG Ally for about 24 hours at this point. Most of that time has been either at work or sleeping or running updates on the Ally itself, but I have had some hands-on time with it. And while this is not going to be a full review, look for that later, it is going to be my first impressions of the ROG Ally, where sometimes it's really awesome and sometimes it's terrible. Whoa. Whoa.
Hey there.
What?
Could you stop pressing that button?
Who is that?
It's me.
Who are you?
Well, I'm Mr. Spoon,
What are you doing here?
bringing you a spoonful of magic in Magic Spoon cereal.
I can't eat cereal. Cereal, I don't know how, but sometime in the 70s they convinced us all that dessert was for breakfast.
Oh, I know. But Magic Spoon is different. Magic Spoon cereal has 0 grams of sugar. It's gluten-free, grain-free, and high in protein.
Probably tastes like cardboard then.
Why don't you try it for yourself?
Oh man, that's magical.
Isn't it though? Magic Spoon cereal is part of a delicious breakfast, and the adult and inner child in you will love these tasty, never boring flavors. You won't believe they're actually 0 grams of sugar.
Wow. Thanks, Mr. Spoon.
No problem, Bill. And for everyone watching, click that link below to grab a variety pack and try it today. And be sure to use the promo code NerdNest at checkout to get $5 off any order, or go to magicspoon.com/nerdnest.
Magic Spoon is so confident in their product that it's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee. If there's any reason that you don't like it, you will get your money back. So click the link below or scan the QR code on the screen and use the code NerdNest for $5 off, or go to magicspoon.com/nerdnest to save $5 today. Since this is a first impressions video, I figured that one of the things I should talk about is the setup. The setup for the ROG Ally is the same as the setup is going to be for any Windows laptop out there. And it seems to be fine on a Windows laptop because you have a keyboard and a mouse. But I don't want to assume that people are going to hook a keyboard and mouse up to this thing when they take it out of the box for the first time. This is supposed to be an all-in-one device, and you shouldn't need other peripherals in order to use it. So when you sit down and you use Windows as a setup for the first time, Windows 11, man, oh man, it is not a good experience. In fact, I was going through the setup process. Halfway through, Windows freaked out during my sign-in because I have a Windows account already. It freaked out, just showed my little avatar, froze, and then didn't do anything for quite a long time. I ended up rebooting the machine and everything was fine, but now I'm running into these really weird issues where it won't recognize my fingerprint. For those of you that don't know, the ROG Ally has a fingerprint reader right here on the power button, and so it won't recognize my fingerprint anymore. I tried adding my fingerprint back in again for Windows Hello sign-on, and after doing it a bunch of times, it said that fingerprint is already registered, but I can't get it to read my fingerprint when I'm trying to sign in. So every single time that I go to sign in, I can't use the fingerprint reader and I have to actually punch in my code onto the screen. Is it a big deal to have to punch in my code? Absolutely not. I have to do that on the Steam Deck anyway. But for something to have a fingerprint reader and have that fingerprint reader not work, it's not a good look. Let's talk about how it feels in the hand. When I first unboxed it, which was literally 5 minutes before sitting down to record a podcast on my YouTube channel, if you haven't checked out the podcast, we talked a lot about the ASUS ROG Ally. We also talked about like the big game announcements that came. I'll leave a link down below so that you guys can check out the latest episode of the NerdNest podcast. I opened up the box about 10 minutes, 5 minutes before starting the podcast, so I didn't really have much time with it. And I was sitting here waiting for games to download. I'm holding it in my hand, and I kept saying to myself, this feels really uncomfortable, especially compared to the Steam Deck. Now, I stand by the fact, no, I don't want to say the fact, the opinion. I stand by my opinion that the Steam Deck is more comfortable than the ROG Ally. However, I will say that once I actually was able to sit down and play a game, there's something that finally clicked in my brain that I was holding the ROG Ally wrong. When you're holding it and not actually playing anything, you end up holding it slightly different. I can't really explain how, but you end up holding it slightly different than you do when you're actually playing a game. So last night, my wife was getting ready for bed. I'm laying in bed. I got the ROG Ally. I load up Street Fighter 6 on here, and I was having an absolute blast. More on Street Fighter 6 in a little bit, but I was having a really, really fun time playing Street Fighter 6 on this, and it was really comfortable to hold. I still think that the Steam Deck is more comfortable because there's just a little bit more beef to the handles. But for the most part, I would say either one is comfortable enough for hours and hours of gameplay. Especially once you are actually playing, it feels really good. All right, let's talk about the hardware itself. First off, let's talk about the thumbsticks. I feel like the thumbsticks on the ROG Ally are really, really nice. They feel better, in my opinion, than the thumbsticks that are on the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck, I felt like, has really good thumbsticks. I feel like these slide just a little bit better. There's a little bit, do I want to say more resistance? Yeah, I feel like there's a little bit more resistance on the ROG Ally thumbstick than on my Steam Deck. That being said, my Steam Deck is, a year and a half old at this point. So, of course, those thumbsticks are going to be worn out. And then on top of that, I did replace those thumbsticks with Hall Effect joysticks at some point. I can't remember when. There's a link in the description if you guys want to check that video out. So maybe that's the issue. But I do feel like these thumbsticks feel really great. They are not capacitive, though, so they don't know when you have your thumb on them. But that's okay because I can't figure out yet how to get gyro working on the ROG Ally. It's my understanding that it has gyro sensors in it, but none of them are yet activated, and that's probably going to come with software update later. And people are going to be saying, oh, that's really lame that they didn't ship with it activated. You know who else did the same exact thing with their controller? That would be Valve. The Steam controller actually shipped without gyro enabled, and then they did a firmware update which enabled it later on. So as somebody who really, really likes gyro, the fact that these are not capacitive thumbsticks, that's really like a tick in the con mark for me. But I really do think that these thumbsticks are really good. I do prefer to have the thumbsticks in line like the Steam Deck has, where they're both up at the top of the device. But having the offset thumbsticks doesn't bother me as much as I thought it would, mostly because the thumbstick is not directly below the face buttons. Time to talk about those face buttons. I did see reviews of pre-shipping. I can't think of the word that I'm trying to look for. Hardware that was not actually like the consumer hardware review units of people complaining about the face buttons sticking. I have not run into any of that. The face buttons feel really good to me. I'm not having any of them stick, and they're very, very clicky, so I'm a huge fan of the face buttons. Not a huge fan of the font on the face buttons, and does the font really matter? Not really, but a lot of times when I look down at the A button and the B button, they both have the same shape at the top, and because they have the same shape at the top, it takes me just a little bit longer than I'd like to figure out which one's A and which one's B. And most people would say, well, why don't you just know? You're a gamer. You play plenty of games. Yeah, but I play games on a bunch of different systems, including the Nintendo Switch, where B and A are reversed. Now, before I get too distracted by the software, I don't want to get into the software yet. I'll talk about the software very soon. But I have to talk about a problem that I ran into with the face buttons and the Armory Crate software and Street Fighter 6, but I'm going to hold off on that and talk about that later on in the video, so stick around for that. Okay, these buttons that are on the sides here, I don't know what they're called. Obviously, we have our menu button, and then we have the view button over here. And then down here we have a button that brings up, it's basically like the quick access menu, kind of like the 3-dot menu on the Steam Deck. And then this brings up Armory Crate SE, which is their proprietary launcher, which launches the games that you have installed on the Steam, or on the, I just called it a Steam Deck, on the ROG Ally. So these buttons feel 1,000 times better than the Steam button and the quick access menu on the Steam Deck. These ones, of course, this is a pre-production unit because I got this early from Valve. The quick access menu feels very mushy and crappy in my opinion. The Steam button, mushy and crappy in my opinion. Also hard to feel because they're not raised up very much from the surface. The quick access menu on the ROG Ally and the Armory Crate button on the ROG Ally feel fantastic. Super clicky and tactile. I'm a big fan of those buttons. I think they're great. All right, the D-pad. The D-pad was something that I was really, really worried about when I saw the ROG Ally, when we first saw it unveiled on April 1st of all days. And I'm here to tell you, I'm fine with it. I thought that I was going to hate how it felt, but honestly, it feels fine. I'm really not running into any issues when I'm playing games with the D-pad. It's a lot more like an Xbox D-pad, where it's a circle with just hills on the north, south, east, and west corners of that circle. Corners of the circle, okay. But it feels really good, and I was playing Street Fighter 6 with it. Felt great, no problems. Big fan of the D-pad. I guess I was worried over nothing. Okay, on the back, we have these two buttons, which you can assign to be whatever you want, essentially. It's M1 and M2. I think that these are really comfortable. They're big and chunky, and they also kind of give you a place to rest your middle finger when you are playing. On the back, just below those buttons, we have these grips, which are nice. I feel like when I am playing this thing, and I don't know why, it's probably just a me thing, I tend to have no good place to grip with my pinky. Especially my right pinky for some reason. As I'm holding this, my right pinky ends up sliding down underneath, and then I almost feel like I'm supporting the weight of the ROG Ally with that pinky. It's very much like my phone is, I don't know where my phone is. It's up here. I hope it's not recording. It was recording the whole, no it wasn't, okay. It almost feels like when you're holding your phone and you're supporting it with your pinky like that, where, I don't know about you guys, but when I hold my phone for too long, my pinky starts to get fatigued, and so I end up holding it like this, wrapping it around, which then I have trouble reaching the bottom of the screen. I kind of have that same feeling with the ROG Ally. My right pinky tends to go down underneath, and I think that might be because this joystick is lower. If this joystick were up here in line with that joystick and the face buttons were lower, maybe that wouldn't be an issue for me. It's certainly not a deal breaker, but it's just something that I noticed. Let's talk about the shoulder buttons. I feel like when comparing to the Steam Deck, the shoulder buttons are easier to reach than the Steam Deck shoulder buttons. The triggers, I feel like they have a lot more resistance than my Steam Deck ones. Like the Steam Deck ones feel a little bit more hollow, and these ones on the ROG Ally feel a little bit more substantial. They all have like this pattern on them, but they're not quite as, the pattern it tactily is not quite as intense as on, say, a DualSense Edge controller. I would have liked to have it just rub a little bit more so you can feel it, have a little bit, just a little bit rougher and not as smooth. But overall, I think the buttons and joysticks on this thing are awesome. The only changes I would make was put the joysticks in line and make the grips just a little bit beefier. All right, let's talk about the software. I'm early days with the software. It's easy to make, decisions about the hardware really fast, but software is going to take some time to like learn all of the ins and outs. And so make sure that you guys subscribe for more on that later. I want to talk about a problem that I had with the face buttons. I don't know if this is a Street Fighter problem, or if it's an ROG Ally problem, or if it's an Armory Crate problem. But the first game that I installed was Street Fighter 6 because that game is awesome. I love it, and I was really excited to play it on the screen. Oh, the screen. I almost forgot about the screen. The screen's awesome. It's gorgeous. It's really beautiful. I would have preferred it be a lower resolution, and I'll talk about why that is when I talk about Diablo 4, okay? But overall, I think the screen looks great. The colors look fantastic. Definitely a better screen than in the Steam Deck. All right, back to the software. I loaded up Street Fighter 6, and I immediately went in to like do a match. And for some reason, Street Fighter 6 was interpreting all of my A presses as B presses, B as A presses, and X and Y were also flipped. Now, I was able to fix this in the Armory Crate software, kind of like how Steam Input lets you remap things. But the fact that this is just essentially supposed to be acting as like an Xbox controller, right? It was not detecting it as such. Now, I did not run into this issue on my Steam Deck when I played Street Fighter 6 on there. So I'm not sure what the problem is. I was able to work around it, but the fact of the matter is that I had to work around it, and that's something that you shouldn't have to do. Like, I should not have to reassign all of my buttons in Armory Crate in order to get the game to recognize them properly. And so that was really, really frustrating. And it took me a while to figure out what exactly was the problem. And if you're somebody who just want, like, if you want to think of this as a console, this is very much not a console. It does not have a console-like experience, which is one of the reasons that I think is a huge con from this thing. It's really more of a PC with a couple of controllers slapped on the side. So this is just something to keep in mind. Something else that I noticed that I almost forgot to talk about in this video is the D-pad in Armory Crate sometimes skips over targets that you're intending to hit. So let's say that I have 3 icons in a row and I'm on the leftmost icon and I want to go to the middle icon. I'm going to push right on the D-pad. Well, when I do that, a lot of times it skips over the icon in the middle and goes to the icon on the right. Now, I can, of course, get to that icon by just tapping it on the touch screen, but that's not something that you should have to do. I will note that this never actually happens to me in video games. It only happens in Armory Crate, so I think that's probably an update that's going to happen in the near future to get it fixed, but I wanted to warn people that that's something that is actually happening. All right, back to the other bill. The game ran great on here. I think I have it running at low settings, but it looks significantly better on this than it does on the Steam Deck. The graphics don't look as soft, but maybe that's because of the RSR or because of the higher resolution display. I'm not sure. I, again, would have liked to seen this be a 720p display instead of a 1080p display for battery savings. Let's move on to Diablo and talk about why I want a lower resolution. Diablo 4 currently the game that is eating up most of my gaming time. I installed on this, launched right away. I didn't have to do a big workaround like I did with the Steam Deck. By the way, if you want to know how to run Diablo 4 on your Steam Deck, there is a link in the description down below. But I went through and installed Diablo 4 on here, and for some reason, it will not allow me to lower the resolution of Diablo 4 down to 720p so that I can turn on RSR and run the game a little bit faster. So on my Steam Deck, I've had no problems maintaining a decent frame rate, hovering somewhere around 50 or 60 frames per second, but that's because the game is running at 720p. On the ROG Ally, it is forced. I don't know if this is a Diablo problem or an Ally problem or a Windows problem, but it is forced to run at 1080p. And that means that it is going to run significantly worse. So even though this is more powerful hardware, I'm unable to get the same frame rates that I'm getting on my Steam Deck on the ROG Ally. This is obviously something that can be fixed with software, but I don't know whose responsibility it is to fix it. It's certainly not Blizzard's responsibility to support every handheld PC maker out there. So unless somebody gets together and, convinces ROG Ally and Blizzard to make friends and give me the option to lower the resolution, I'm probably not going to be playing Diablo 4 on this very much, because at most I was getting like 40 frames per second, which was really disappointing. All right. Let's talk about the software and the hardware and how they meet, because there is one feature that I thought was really cool and I'm looking forward to experimenting more with it. And that is the fact that you can essentially go into the Armory Crate software and tell the ROG Ally exactly how much RAM you want to give to the GPU versus the CPU. So let's say that you're playing a game and that game is bottlenecked at the CPU, a game like Valheim. Well, what you could probably do is give the CPU more RAM through the Armory Crate software, and that game should run better because the bottleneck that you're running into is a CPU problem. Conversely, if you're playing a game that really depends on the graphics horsepower of the GPU, you get to decide how much RAM is going to go to the GPU instead. And you can set it anywhere between 1 and I believe 8 gigs of RAM for the GPU. This is really, really going to come in clutch, I hope, when it comes to playing games that are more CPU bound or more GPU bound. It's going to give you more options in order to try and get better frame rates. So as I said, I've only had this thing for about 24 hours, and I was just at work all day and I slept all night. So I'm going to do some experiments and see if I can get Diablo 4 running better on this by adjusting the GPU and the RAM that's allocated to the GPU, and I'll let you guys know if I'm able to figure that out. All right, let's talk about the different modes that you can go through. So when you are playing on this thing, if you bring up the quick access menu, if that's not what it's called, feel free to tell me what it's called in the comments down below. I can't remember. But if you bring up the quick access menu, you can then decide what performance level you want it to be on. There is silent performance level, which lowers the TDP, I believe, down to 9 watts. It might be 10 watts, but I think it's 9. You can lower it down to 9 watts with the silent mode. Then you can go to performance mode, which is 15 watts, which is essentially the same wattage that the Steam Deck is capable of. Or you can go into turbo mode, and that's going to increase it, I believe, all the way up to 35 watts, which is a lot. It's going to burn through your battery like nobody's business at that point. I have a tendency just to leave it on performance mode with any big game, because I don't want to run the battery down super quick. I want to actually have a chance to play a game on this thing before I run the battery down. So performance mode is probably going to be where you are for most games. But if you're playing indie games and you want to save some battery, make sure you put it in silent mode. Now, the silent mode is called silent mode because the fans essentially don't turn on, because this doesn't need any cooling if it's running a really, really low TDP. And then the performance mode, I would say, is definitely quieter than the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck has a infamously loud fan. I have a pre-production unit, so I'm sure that my fan is louder than most, but this thing, like, until I was like in turbo mode, I didn't hear a whisper out of this thing. So I guess the next thing that I want to talk about is Windows. The ROG Ally is missing the most important thing that the Steam Deck has, and that is the trackpads. The trackpads, I wish, were a default in video games. These trackpads are amazing. They have so many uses, and I wish Xbox and PlayStation and Nintendo and everybody else would adopt trackpads as additions to the controller, because they give you so many options and so many ways to control your game. The ROG Ally does not have trackpads, and that is a nightmare when you are trying to use Windows without a mouse and keyboard. Windows is a terrible UI for this form factor. The touch targets are too small. I end up fighting with it just a little bit too much to try and do the things that I want to do. The gestures seem to work fine, where you can swipe up and bring up your start menu and stuff like that. If you know how to use a Windows PC, you know how to use this, but using it without a mouse and keyboard is not an enjoyable experience. And it's my opinion that the ROG Ally would be 1,000 times better. 1,000 times better if it were running SteamOS. SteamOS is so much better for gaming than Windows, but you would lose a lot of the advantages that you get with the ROG Ally in the fact that you don't have to worry about jumping through hoops to get certain games running. So I guess it's a toss-up. And, if you're looking for a more console-like experience, I think that the Steam Deck is a better fit for you. But if you're looking for something that has a smaller, lighter form factor, that is just a little more portable and runs pretty much everything without having to jump through hoops of, getting the right Proton version, then the ROG Ally is right for you. But what I guess I would also say is that at the end of the day, every person is going to have a different use case that's most important to them. And I don't think that you'd be wrong making either decision, because both of these systems, I got that backwards, both of these systems are really cool, and I'm glad that I have them both. Anyway, let me know what you guys think about the ROG Ally versus the Steam Deck in the comment section down below. And if you really enjoyed this video, then I'm going to guess that you're going to enjoy this video as well. From the NerdNest, I'm Bill. Stay rad, everybody.